Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host today, Ron Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Normal. This film will actually be dropping on VOD and on digital this Friday on the 22nd. I had the opportunity to check out this film, and when I actually saw the trailer for this movie for the first time, I think last week, if I recall correctly, I liked what I saw, but I wasn't officially sold on it just yet. Not because I didn't think the movie was not going to be any good, but something about the plot synopsis here, which I'll get into in a little bit here, it's just a story of this sort, in my opinion, doesn't really appeal to me that much. Not to say that it's not going to turn out good. It's just that whenever it deals with a couple that are not really happy with each other and they're considering looking into other avenues to see if that could help either better the relationship or find other means to really fulfill their own satisfaction, if you will. For some reason, that just doesn't really appeal to me as a story majority of the time. But having seen the trailer, something about the film did speak to me where I wanted to check it out. And I can truthfully say that I really did like this movie. I also want to point out, too, that our very own Kuya P had spoke with the writer-director of the film, and I believe his first name is pronounced Ragendra Singh. If I mispronounced the first name, I apologize. But he had the opportunity to speak with the writer-director of the film here on the channel. And if you have not checked that out, I recommend you guys do so. And I'll make sure I have the icon for you guys to click on for you to check out that interview, because it really was a pretty in-depth interview to give the director's insight about what he had gone through to make the movie and what more or less kind of led up to making this film, which was actually quite interesting in my opinion and hearing the story. But having seen the film, I was also debating on whether or not if I really want to get into more or less the spoilers in this film. Not that this movie has any surprise ending or any sort of shocking ending by any means. It's just that the way that the film ends provides a very nice closure to the overall story, which I thought was very fitting considering the circumstances that we're seeing here with this story. So I opted not to do that, not necessarily because because the film has not been released as of yet, at least as by the time this video gets uploaded. But I think it's one of those stories that when you watch it and then you see how the film ends, it does have, at least in my opinion, a pretty wonderful impact for closing out the story for the characters that we're following in this film, which I think was honestly quite beautiful in my opinion. So I will get into the plot synopsis, no spoilers, and then of course I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. Anakin and Leia, married and in their early 30s, have had their first child. The complications that followed the newly found parenthood are beginning to set in, and the repetitive nature of the relationship is getting repetitive. Anakin and Leia surely find themselves exhausted, which leads to many failed attempts at intimacy. Their relationship takes a toll because Anakin and Leia have been consumed by their doubts and insecurities. As a result, they begin to drift apart. Instead of having open communication, they bury it under the rug. In this new chapter of Anakin and Leia's lives, they must find their new version of normal in order to save their relationship and, most importantly, their family. And that right there is a film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with the film does have to do with the overall story in this film. I really did like the story. Now, I'm going to point this out just to get this out of the way. When I saw the trailer for the first time, first thing I noticed right away was that this is an interracial couple. In fact, majority of the cast is all of people of color and also different sexual orientations as well, too. But not once was it ever a topic to bring up in this movie. In fact, you really are just dealing with the people, the individuals, and getting their story. Nothing to do with their background, nothing to do with their heritage in terms of like being the main focus or having to deal with, how Anakin's Indian heritage was a factor in the relationship. It was none of that at all. In fact, that was never an issue. And when you were seeing the clash that both Leia and Anakin have with each other, none of it has to do with their respective cultures or their background. It was never a case here. It was literally just differences of opinion, differences of personalities, and differences of approaches and whatnot. That was really the focus of how this couple deals with each other in these various stages of their lives, especially having a newborn child in their home now, where they're having to deal with the more or less the consequences of having to either not being prepared for it or maybe being prepared but not being as prepared as they should have been. So you're seeing how that particular part of their lives has an effect on them, where they clearly did not have some form of discussion on how to deal with these matters moving forward from here. And that's part of the story that I think was really unique, and where they have a way they want to go about it, but they're not really upfront about how they want to go about it. Because they definitely do make attempts to try to be very intimate, but for some reason, especially with Anakin, he just has a hard time. It's not that he's not attracted to his wife; he's very much attracted, but just he said in the movie too, where the fact he saw his child come out of his wife's vagina, that it was hard for him to really look at her the same way in that respect when it comes to being intimate with her, even though he still very much loves her and wants to be with her. But he just couldn't get over that roadblock of having that mental image of whenever he's going to be into his wife, that's going to keep popping in his head. And honestly, that's kind of a real thing too. Now, I've never personally had that problem for myself, even though the birth of my son was something that it wasn't as joyous for me personally, but not for the reasons why Anakin said it. Although it was, I completely understand what he means by that. But yeah, that's a whole different conversation on its own. But the point I'm getting at here is that I actually understood that part of the relationship when he was talking about how it was hard for him to be really wanted to be intimate with his wife after seeing that. Whereas Leah, on the other hand, she clearly is making every effort to try to be intimate, and despite her efforts, nothing comes out of it here. And you can see the frustration where she's having some insecurities and having some doubts, and so is Anakin as well too, where they're trying to figure out what can they do to spice up their relationship again. But then they start to find other avenues along the way where they're more or less kind of testing the waters of maybe I can try that with someone else to rekindle that spark in my life that's missing in my relationship with my wife and my husband. So when it comes to that part of the story there, I was kind of concerned of whether or not if that would carry well, because again, when I watch a movie of this sort, it's not always a film of this sort that I really gravitate to, because a lot of times these type of stories are kind of handled very generic in a lot of ways, and it just doesn't do anything for me. Very, very rarely does a film of this subject matter actually catches my attention. But it just so happens that when I was watching this movie, it kept my attention virtually the entire way through. The one thing I also want to point out too is that you also get different perspectives of other people who have an opinion on how they like to go about with their relationship that kind of more or less help rekindle their love life with their significant other in some way or shape or form, by making decisions that they know what in most people's eye would probably be considered very questionable or immoral in a lot of ways. Not that they killed anybody, it's nothing of that sort, but just in terms of how they want to revitalize their love life here. But they're going to go do it with somebody else to try to bring that spark back into their own personal lives, and then have that shared with their significant other. When you watch the movie, you'll understand what I mean by that there. But there's certainly a lot of, I wouldn't say complications, but a very unique perspective on how people find something that could rekindle that part of their love life in many ways that I never really consider doing or even trying at all. Not that I want to, but I'm just saying that it's a very unique perspective, and to hear someone else's point of view and how that helped them out. And that's very much, I know for a fact, is like in real life with a lot of people, that only a handful that I do know that have done this here, where it actually worked for them to some degree. So there's also another part of the story that I want to delve into too, which is that when it came to both of these characters' choices and wanting to be intimate with another person that they've come across in the story, where I'll be frank with you, it was a situation where I wasn't questioning their motives as far as like they were doing anything wrong, but just understanding the decisions that they're making and why they're doing it, and having to come to understanding as to why they're doing it, so that way whenever they follow through with the decision, the consequences that fall through after that, I had no judgment over them at all whatsoever. In fact, I was quite understanding of it. And that's actually what I really liked about the film, that it helped me come to an understanding with the character's journey about what they were going through in these choices that they were making when it comes to finding a way to spark up that intimacy that they wanted with their loved ones, but weren't getting it, and finding it with, more likely, with someone else. So I actually thought that was really quite interesting in how this was handled here, because it wasn't handled in a more like a comedic tone, which there are some comedic elements into this film, with this film, I should say, but it was handled in a much grounded fashion, which I thought worked very well for this movie. And the fact that this movie is actually 90 minutes long, I actually think this is a really perfect runtime here with what we're having to see here, and how you can see the whole overall character's journey gets developed and then closes out by the end of this movie. So there's really a whole lot that I did take away from this movie that honestly I didn't really think I was going to take away from it. I was just hoping to get a good film out of it here, but it's actually turned to be a really good film that I thoroughly did enjoy, and I actually would go out of my way to watch again and buy too. So I Yeah, that's pretty much it for my positive without really getting into spoilers, because a lot of things that I want to delve into are in that spoiler territory, but I'm hoping that really does cover with my overall thoughts on the film for hopefully you guys to enjoy, to want to encourage you to want to check out, I meant to say. So again, that's the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. I don't know if I really have any real negatives with the film. Not to say this movie is perfect, because it isn't a perfect film, but I don't know if I had any major negatives that I can say it sticks out for me where I had a problem with the movie. I think the only real issue that I had that I can think of right now was that I remember at certain points of the film, I felt like it was a little slow. Not because I thought it was boring by any means, because there's a certain momentum the film carries that starts to build up, and then all of a sudden it just slows down. And that momentum that was developing there for me, that I got from the movie, was working for me, where I started to want to maintain with that same pace, if you will, but it kind of slowed down here. But it didn't happen very often. It was kind of seldom. It was maybe like once or twice at most, if I recall correctly, where I kind of felt that momentum build up and all of a sudden just slowed down, and I just wanted things to move rather quickly at that point. But it wasn't something that really took me away from the movie or ruined my enjoyment factor of the film by any means. But if I can point out some of the other negatives that would come to mind right now, I mean, I think, the fact that we got introduced to the various other characters in this movie where you get to see their perspective. I remember at one point I thought I would like to see a little more of that, but I don't think that would have been necessary to do that here, because it definitely would have dragged the film a little bit longer in areas that probably wouldn't have helped out to tell and focusing on the narrative we're following here with Anakin and Leia. But I will say that, having to get to know a lot of the other characters here, I honestly kind of want to get to know them a little bit more. So I think that's really the only real major negative that I could say that would come to mind, but that's not really a negative. It's more just me wanting to get to know the character a little bit more, having to see a little bit of the personality, understand where they're coming from, understand their background and their perspective, and just wanted to get to know them more in that respect. But with the little that we get with the film, which was sprinkled out beautifully, in my opinion, I thought worked quite well. So I mean, that's really that's all I really have, I meant to say, with the negatives in this movie. Nothing really major at all. But again, this is not a perfect film by any means. It's just that those little lulls in the parts of the movie where he had a momentum going, it kind of slowed down for me. That was the only real sticking point for me, because I remember at one point when I was watching the film, I think I stopped watching it because I was just, not that I was bored, but I remember thinking like, God, I want things to move quickly here. And it happened once that I can recall, and maybe another time too, where I actually just paused the movie, got up and walked around, did something, then came back, picked up from where I last left off, and then just kind of picked up from there without any major issues there. So, and I really can't remember what part of the film that was. I've only seen the movie once, but that's pretty much it right there for me. So that'll be the end of my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. I really did like this movie quite a bit. I would definitely go out of my way to buy this movie. Now, I do know that this is not going to be a film for everybody, because the thing is about this movie is that it's a unique story, but it's not a story we haven't seen before. But the reason why I did appreciate the film, as I mentioned before in the positives, is that it does it in a way that's very grounded for me personally, but it was interesting because you have different perspective on how the various parts of the relationship that you have with both the main characters here and how they handle certain things along the way. To some degree, I remember at one point it was kind of cliche. I would say, I think one or two parts that I recall correctly, but it didn't take away from my enjoyment of the film by any means here. But I remember thinking, it's a little cliche. We've seen this before. But again, it was just a nitpick of in my part here about those little moments here. But it was nothing major by any means at all. But overall, this film, I think, offers a very unique perspective where I love the fact that you're just following great characters. You're following a great story, not concerning yourself with race being an issue, not concerning yourself with the character's background as being the butt of the joke or the focus of the issue or whatever the case may be. It really is just a bunch of great characters having to tell a great story and just getting to know who they are, who just happen to be a people of color. I really did appreciate that. And honestly, I want to see a lot more of these stories here where we get to see perspective of various people's backgrounds, where you think you may have a perception about them, but then once you get to know them, you realize that they're not this monolith that people may perceive them to be, but they're just people like anybody else. And that's why I thought this film was so good in that respect. But really, it is a good story. This is a good story with great characters. So for me, I would give this film a raise a glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. If you have seen the movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the NRW and make sure you share, like our videos, and hit the notification bell while you're down there. Also, follow NRW on social media on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Rob Medina, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina. And my guest this week is writer-director Kyle Kawika Harris. This man, I will say right now, and I have the utmost confidence in saying this here, is going to be the future when it comes to the crime thriller genre. He has a movie coming out later this year called Out of Exile, and all I will say is that look out for this man when it comes to his films, because he is going to change the genre. I really, truly do believe that he's going to take it to a whole nother level and set the standard for the crime thriller genre, and whatever genre he may want to take along the way as well too. I really think he's going to be that good where people are going to take notice of what he can do and what he's going to do to change the genre, if you will. So be on the lookout for that episode when it drops this Friday here on the NRW. And also follow my show social media accounts on Instagram. I meant to say You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And that's going to be it for me, guys. I hope you guys did enjoy this review. And until next time, stay safe out there and cheers.